welcome to a special edition of Sports4CLE. Taking a look at the AFC North as the Browns, a new head coach, along with the Steelers, as well as the Ravens. Let's welcome in Emory Hunt from CBS Sports. Emory, appreciate you joining us. You look at this North and, two guys that had 19, 18 years as head coaches in Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin, no longer with those teams. Kevin Stefanski no longer there. Zach Taylor stays. When you look at the North, what do you see?
Excitement, because you're right. That's a lot of tenure that just walked out the door, including Kevin Stefanski. Rarely do you see that much coaching tenure turnover in an offseason in a division. So the excitement is there for the AFC North. And what Baltimore is going to look like, we kind of have an idea, but we still don't know. What the heck Pittsburgh going to look like? This is over, what, 3 presidential administrations we have seen the same head coach. So we don't know what to expect in Pittsburgh. We kind of have an idea because we kind of know who Mike McCarthy is. And Cleveland, you're excited about Todd Monkin too. So I just think this is a fun time in the AFC North, probably one of the more entertaining divisions we're going to get in 2026.
So the Ravens trade 2 first-round picks for Max Crosby. First time they have traded first-round picks for a veteran player in their history. They do it too, this year's and next year's. What does that move say to you relative to the Ravens?
They understand where they've whiffed in the draft. This used to not be an issue for Baltimore. Baltimore used to always nail their draft picks in terms of that position. They'll get the cornerback position right. They'll get the edge rusher right. They'll get defensive tackle right. They'll get linebacker right. They'll whiff on receiver all the time, right? But they've slowly started to get better at receiver, and they've been whiffing consistently at the edge position. So this says, you know what? We're just going to bypass trying to pick one of these edge rushers in this draft. Go get a known commodity. Max Crosby was 29 years old, 28 years old, so still in that youngish age to where he can still give you 3 to 4 good elite level years. So I understand it. You're Baltimore. You have an elite quarterback. You trust that your offense is going to be what it is. You just got to get that defense where they can close out some games, get better. So I understand it from a Ravens perspective, based on the historical issues they've had in terms of drafting edge rushers in recent times.
So you look at the Bengals. They let Trey Hendrickson reach free agency. Now you have Joe Burrow, but you have to face Myles Garrett for 2 games, Max Crosby for 2 games, T.J. Watt for 2 games, with a quarterback that has been injured a lot of his career. If you're the Bengals, are you running out and grabbing offensive linemen to try to keep your franchise guy healthy?
That would make sense, right? It would also make sense to keep your best players on defense. Like, it would make sense to sign a Trey Hendrickson, right? And also to build around an offensive line. It's crazy because the joke I made about the Ravens whiffing on edge guys, for a long period of time, the Bengals have drafted extremely well. They just don't re-sign guys, right? So they've been able to draft guys in and have good teams, but when it comes time to pay them, they let them walk. Now, they started to pay guys in recent years, but you see the same old Cincinnati Bengals with how they handle this Trey Hendrickson situation, whom they signed from the New Orleans Saints, who has been jettisoning some of their better players that they've drafted as well, too. When you think about the Bengals and protecting Joe Burrow and trying to break down this door that's called the Baltimore Ravens in the division, I don't understand why they just don't value the trenches. The skill players, they go out and draft, they sign, they've done a good job. I feel like in order to do something, to get somewhere different, they got to do something different in their process, and that's why they have to invest in that O-line and D-line if they want to get through this division.
All right, so how do you see the Browns figuring into this, and how is it reasonable for fans to expect the Browns to be competitive in the division in 2026?
Absolutely. The Browns were competitive last year. And the fact that the 49ers game was another game where you look at, like, man, special teams and going for it on 4th down, that just bad situational football doomed them. They had that game. They had the Bills game. They had the Vikings game. They had the Titans game. So that tells you this team was more closer to 8-9 or 9-8 than they were 5-12. And when you look at what they have in Shedeur Sanders, who I like, along with the run game that they have, two talented backs, three if you want to include Rocket Sanders, who was a great find for them as an undrafted free agent. They're building along the offensive line. They're building out the receiving core. That includes the tight end, so they're going to add more depth and talent there. And now you have a full offseason of everyone learning at the same pace with a defense that has a lot of the same pieces in place already, especially within that coaching room. So this is a team that you can be. You know more about the Browns than you do a lot of teams in this division. So I feel like the Browns are going to be one of those teams we're talking about week 10, week 11. They're in the 6th seed spot right now in the postseason. Can they sustain that? Can they get through the door? I think this is a fun team to watch. I think this is a team that could be a playoff team pending they do things right in the offseason in terms of like free agency, and also if they nail the draft once again.
Yeah, so what has to go right for the Browns to do that, I guess is where I was going.
Trenches. And again, within this division, you build inside out. So you have to factor in defensively. If they get depth behind their front line, defensive line, the front line defense or front seven, they'll be fine there. But offensively speaking, it's the depth along the offensive line. So yeah, they'll find a Titus Howard, which they made the move for. They'll draft a guy. They'll probably sign another guy up front to start. But then you want to draft depth and sign depth. So when you have that war of attrition known as the NFL season, when we get to a week 12 or week 13, you're not looking at a who's who of an offensive line. You look at guys, okay, this guy can step in and play well for us in 3 to 4 games. This guy gives us a 2 to 3 game window. So at least you have more of a known commodity, because I trust in the run game. I trust in those backs. I trust in Shedeur Sanders. I do trust in their receiving core if the offensive line is correct. And I think they have a chance to really do things the right way and get that part squared away going into the season. So therefore, toward the end of the season, we won't have these same questions that we had last year, where it was like, man, like I said, I joked with you when we were in Indy. Sometimes you thought you were watching the Ryan Fire as opposed to the Cleveland Browns, and that looked that way up front along the offensive line.
All right, before I let you go, what do you think of the Todd Monkin hire, and what does it do for the offense?
I'm a fan of Todd Monkin. I've always been, and I like the fact that he gets the party started. He thinks how you're supposed to think as a coach. I'm going to put my best players in position to do what they do best all the time. If you have a athletic quarterback, I'm not going to ask you to drop back, 7-step drop and scan the defense. I'm going to do things to where I can accentuate your athleticism. If I have a back that does a great job in catching the ball out of the backfield, I'm not going to sacrifice you to be a guard in the backfield to just go out there and just block all day on 3rd down. So I like that he sees the talent that the player has and calls plays about that, because it's about players, not plays. So that's why we saw Stetson Bennett, beat out a Carson Beck 2 years in a row and lead Georgia to back-to-back national championships. That's why we saw Lamar Jackson put together the greatest quarterbacking season in NFL history that didn't warrant an MVP, thanks to a couple of sports writers. So I think we'll see Todd Monkin get the best out of this team, and they'll just continue to add pieces, and he'll continue to make gumbo out of whatever ingredients he has, because that's what he does. And that's why I think this offense is going to be fun to watch, because he'll look at the talent. Okay, we can scheme up these with these guys, and then next year it'll be something different, and the following year it'll be something different again. So he's an amoeba in terms of his scheme and coaching. That's what I like about him the most.
Emory Hunt, thanks so much. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Emory. Emory Hunt, make sure you check him out. CBS Sports, always good and insightful stuff. We're step aside, take a quick time out. We continue with our AFC North special here in Sports for CLE. Stay with us.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little flag in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me. The Ohio lottery. Put a little flag in your day. Put a little flag in your day.
Browns are up first on our special edition of Sports for CLE, previewing the AFC North. Let's welcome Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Reports show. Pete, 3 new head coaches in the division. What does that do? How big of a wild card does that make the AFC North? Because You would think the Steelers are going to change a little bit with Mike McCarthy, and anytime there's a new coach, team changes.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly going to be a difference. I still lean towards who's got the most talent right this second. As we sit here, the Ravens still seem to have an advantage in that. They have Lamar Jackson, multiple-time MVP. They just added Max Crosby. They've got a lot of star power on that team, and then the rest are going to be figuring it out. As far as the Steelers and Browns go, it's largely the Steelers are trying to defy what everybody else is sort of expecting them to do, which is sort of tear down and rebuild. Mike McCarthy is saying we're not going to do that. And for the Browns, they are trying to build, or whatever you want to call what they're doing right now, to try to get themselves back out of the basement and be in the competitive spot.
You look at that. What does Andrew Berry need to do to this roster in order to? I mean, who knows if you can get as high as you want to go? What's the first thing you have to do so you keep the water from coming in, if you will?
Well, more than anything, they've got to win on the line of scrimmage on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they're pretty good, although they do have some questions to answer with just some natural guys leaving and aging out of their program. But offensive line, that inline tight end, that's going to be a big part because they want to be able to run the ball. And whoever is playing quarterback, make their life easier and make it easier for them to just operate the offense as opposed to having to carry it. Now, all that being said, it gets a whole lot easier if you have a really good quarterback, and that's sort of the big thing that the Browns still have to answer. The Steelers still have to answer that question. So, yeah, that's going to be a big challenge for those teams to sort of get enough around them to make a perhaps average quarterback or even less than look better than maybe they otherwise are.
You look at that, and who knows what the quarterback answer is for the Browns. I would assume, and I think we've talked about this before, you got to make the offensive. You got to give the quarterback a fighting chance, and there were times last year where this offensive line just didn't do that.
Well, I mean, watching the Super Bowl and all these people looking at the Patriots and watching them struggle, and I'm sitting here going, I had to watch this 17 times all last year. This is just natural existence because they were just getting destroyed on the front. The quarterback looked like he had no answer to the situation. They didn't have enough weapons. So, yeah, that was the Browns' everyday existence last year outside of a couple games. So, yes, line of scrimmage is critical. Getting more weapons. Certainly, if it's Shedeur Sanders, if it's a veteran, if it was something else at the quarterback position, you've got to put them in the best possible situation to succeed, to see what they are ultimately going to be able to do here.
You look at Todd Monkin. How big of an advantage, the Browns' new head coach, how big of an advantage that he seems to be able to thrive with different styles. It isn't like, I'm going to jam my guy into this system. That doesn't seem to be the way he coaches.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest selling point to Todd Monkin being the head coach of this team is the fact that he goes to a program like Georgia, Stetson Bennett's your quarterback, and they have all these talented players like Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, so on and so forth, and they figure out an offense. And it's dominant, and they win back-to-back national championships. He goes to the NFL. He goes to Lamar Jackson. The expectations are there with him. They add Derrick Henry. They have one of the most prolific offenses for 2 years there. I think the big question for Todd Monkin, and I don't know if I'd love to know the answer to this, but not since really, I think maybe at Southern Miss, has he been sort of put in a position where you could say, I get to build what I want as opposed to being handed a whole bunch of pieces and making it work. He's very good at that. But I'm just genuinely curious, what does Todd Monkin want to do?
Yeah, I'm with you. And I agree with you. The Ravens, you look at their roster, and they're a little bit ahead. How much separation do you think there is from top to bottom of this division?
Well, I mean, last year, everybody thought the Ravens were going to walk, and obviously they ran into problems with injuries and everything else, and it just sort of fell apart, which has unfortunately been the issue for them. And that's certainly not a Lamar-centric issue. I mean, I go back a couple years when Dak Prescott got hurt. When quarterbacks get hurt in a meaningful way, they just never seem to be the same that season. And Lamar Jackson's style just naturally puts him in position where the amount of running he does, trying to be a playmaker, where if he gets hurt, the Ravens fall off a cliff because they're asking so much of him. They've got offensive line questions to answer. They've got all these other elements to figure out. So that allows a team like maybe the Cincinnati Bengals, if their quarterback situation, if Joe Burrow can stay healthy, which has obviously been its own problem. Like so much of the AFC North comes down to who's the last man standing. And incredibly last year, it was Aaron Rodgers of all people. It was the 40-plus-year-old quarterback that everybody thought was going to fall apart, who managed to stand the whole year.
When you look at that, Max Crosby comes to this. So now you have Crosby, Garrett, and T.J. Watt. So you've got edge rushers. Does that at all put even more of an emphasis on the offensive line for Andrew Berry, just because every week in the division, you're going to go against an elite pass rush?
Absolutely. I mean, they didn't need Max Crosby to sort of put an exclamation point on that, but yeah, it hammers the point home that if you're not going to be good there, that's been the one thing the Ravens haven't had, has been a premier edge rusher. They've been searching for it. They tried with Odafe Owe, who was okay. Kyle Van Noy's been a very good role player for them. But Max Crosby's the guy who sort of is supposed to come in and take over games for them. And they have Kyle Hamilton. They have all these other pieces there. So if he can give you that extra element and be a closer, which is, keep in mind, the Ravens have been one of the worst teams in the league in terms of giving up fourth quarter leads. How many games have they had double-digit fourth quarter leads and then lost? That is why Max Crosby's there. So they have what they believe is a closer. So yeah, it's incredibly important that the Browns not only address the offensive line, but come up with protection schemes that are going to be effective. So George Warhop has a lot on his plate as the team's new offensive line coach to make that work.
When you look at the guys that the Browns have brought in on that line for Warhop, what do you expect the offense to look like? And I know we're only a couple guys in. Do you get any sense of what they want to do offensively relative to the type of players they're bringing in?
Well, based off of Zion Johnson and Titus Howard, I would say they're not really tipping their hand one way or the other. I would say it's probably more likely to be a little bit more zone than gap, more movement as opposed to power. Zion Johnson is incredibly athletic, light on his feet, and can do all those things. And Titus Howard just has been more of a positional blocker as opposed to a guy who's going to knock people off the line of scrimmage. So it at least lends that lean there, but it's clear I think the Browns want to be able to do both things. I think the Browns want to be able to get in situations where they can just drive the opponent off the ball and win that way, but they've got a very talented running back with vision that, frankly, I did not expect to see in the NFL in Quinshon Judkins. So having these guys that can win on the move, can do zone elements is certainly something that I think fits the personnel they have.
All right, so we've talked about 6 and 24 quite a bit. Are there any defensive players, if they are available at 6, that you think Andrew Berry has to have?
No. I just, from my evaluation, I just think the offensive players, the receivers, and I know there's a lot of people who disagree, and that's fine. I think the wide receivers, Mekhi Lemon and Carnell Tate, are going to be as good relative to how they projected the league as any of the defensive guys. And that's not to say that those guys aren't good. Caleb Downs is phenomenal. If you want to put him in a slot safety, that seems very luxurious with that pick, but I get it. Ruben Bain, very talented player. David Bielik, these are all very good players. I think that the temptation for defense is actually going to come with the 24th pick. And I don't know if he'll make it that far, but the guy that sort of jumps out to me as a possible wild card is Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Oregon. If Mike Rutenberg is sitting there going, I want to put my stamp on this defense, I want to get a real center fielding free safety. I had Jesse Bates in Atlanta, and Dylan Thieneman was extremely productive in terms of getting to the ball. And then obviously at the combine, he tested out of his mind. That may be why he doesn't last that long. But safeties, everybody tends to overestimate how quickly safeties go off the board. So that's the one guy where I sit here and go, I could see where the Browns get very tempted and go, we're going to grab this guy at 24.
I'm with you relative to the wide receiver, and you can. Here's my thought behind that. Fannon's a really good player. Judkins is a really good player. You want a guy that the defense goes, man, we can't let this guy beat us. I don't know if that's Tate. I don't know if it's Lemon. But if you get a guy like that, it makes Judkins better. It makes Fannin better. It makes all the other skill position players better because it creates more space on the field.
And spacing has been a huge problem for this team. But you just look at the contracts being handed out. Alec Pierce getting $29 million a year for a guy who just cracked 1,000 yards, and maybe he's going to be worth it. But the money being paid out to these guys is enormous, and there's a reason for that. Those guys are game-changing players. And the Browns have not had that entity really since, obviously Jerry Jeudy had a really good 2024. They really hit well with Amari Cooper for a couple seasons, but they have not had a consistent problem for opponents in terms of the wide receiver position, in terms of a guy who can change the game, and just the amount of ways they can sort of cause problems. If, to your point, space, certainly a big element. It opens up the rest of the offense. I think it makes Jerry Jeudy better. I think it makes guys like Isaiah Bond more threatening. But more than anything, give Quinshon Judkins some space, or Dylan Sampson, who is a guy who, obviously the offensive line struggled, but you saw glimpses last year, particularly against the Raiders. You're like, wow, he gets space and he gets to do this. So yes, I want to magnify that as much as possible. And then the other thing with wide receiver in general, my worry is if you don't hit it this year early, and you get in your position where you may miss out on the top guys by the time 24th pick comes along. If the Browns are coming into the 2027 draft and they're all about quarterback, you're then kicking this can down the road again. And I don't know whether they're going to come back and be able to get that premium receiver. And I don't mean just getting another third round guy, which everybody seems to hate, or whatever. I mean getting that premier top of the line receiver. Everybody goes, yeah, that guy's special.
All right, before I let you go, give me a home run scenario in your mind for Andrew Berry at 6-24, and one that would be a pretty big red flag in your mind.
Well, all right, this will not be popular. So my Mekhi Lemon at 6 for me is great, and then Caleb Lomu, the offensive tackle at Utah. The scenario I've seen thrown out there, this is why people will get mad, I hate, is Monroe Freeling at 6 and Omar Cooper at 24. And the reason I say that is because I really like Monroe Freeling. I just don't think he's sixth in the draft good. And then if you compile that by reaching and taking Omar Cooper, who I view as a second-round receiver, you have basically wasted the fact that you had 2 first-round picks. It doesn't mean those guys can't be great players, and I could be loud wrong, and I hope I would be. But it does suggest that you are sort of not playing the board and taking advantage of the value that was there, which is something they did really, really well last year.
Yeah, and again, I'm with you. I want a playmaker. Give me somebody that with the ball in his hands threatens the defense to add to Judkins and Fannin as well.
Absolutely. I mean, look, if you like Carnell Tate, great. I would be thrilled with that. I like Mekhi Lemon, but just more guys that can score the ball. That's it. They just need points. Like, forget all the positional needs. You know what the Browns really need more of this offseason? Points.
I'm with you. Yes, lots of them. As always, great stuff. Pete Smith, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Pete Smith, make sure you check him out. Orange and Brown Report, always really good and insightful Browns information. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We're talking Bengals with Tim Bielik. Our special edition of the AFC North continues on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue this special edition of Sports4CLE previewing the AFC North. Bengals head coach Zach Taylor at the Combine was asked about being the survivor of AFC North coaches, the only one to continue with his team in 2026.
Well, it's strange. I've got a lot of respect for those 3 guys that competed against the last couple of years, and obviously great coaches and have had a lot of success. And so again, it's a little strange, but I'm sure I'll get used to it very quickly.
Is there any impact, like tangible impact to the change in the division, or is it not really?
Not for me to sit here and say today. Maybe those teams will evolve in different ways than they have over the last couple of years. Kind of impossible for me to say, but exciting for us. We got continuity, and so we got to capitalize on that and continue to build and move forward.
With that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik. He is the Bengals beat reporter for cleveland.com. Tim, as we sit here, just your thoughts about where the Bengals are, middle of free agency.
I think they had a pretty decent day one, signing Brian Cook, the safety from the Chiefs, and then also adding Boy Mafe, the defensive end from the Seahawks, who started his career off very well. But I think, his stats seemed like they went down. Maybe he wasn't quite a fit with Mike McDonald's defense in Seattle. But certainly, the Bengals needed to really address defense, no question about it. And you still have Trey Hendrickson out there. Who knows where he's going to kind of end up. They lost Joseph Osai earlier on Monday to the Jets. So this was a defense that was just simply not good enough the last 2 seasons to get the Bengals into the playoffs. So they really needed to address it. And as far as, Zach Taylor talking about, being the only coach in the AFC North, it's a testament to the continuity of the division that, Kevin Stefanski was the last new coach added to the division in 2020. Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh had been around the division for what feels like forever. And now all of a sudden you go into a season where, you have new coaches in 3/4 of the division. Mike McCarthy's in Pittsburgh, Jesse Minter's in Baltimore, Todd Monkin's in Cleveland, Zach Taylor, has been around in Cincinnati since 2019. So he talked about obviously continuity being an edge, and I think it kind of is. He doesn't have to install anything new for his team. They can just kind of keep building on the things that they've been building on. So I do think there is a little bit of an edge there for Cincinnati when it comes to that continuity in a division that I think is pretty uncertain. But as far as free agency, I think the Bengals have done a pretty good job to start.
It seems like with what you've lost, what you've gained, you're kind of back where you were at with the defense, though. Hendrickson, I know he was injured, and I know he wants a boatload of money. He was still a pretty good edge rusher. Do you see gains, I guess, is where I'm going? Did the defense get better?
I think it got better from where they were with Hendrickson not being on the roster. Remember, he only played 7 games last season, and he had core muscle surgery in December, and he's also a guy who just turned 31 years old. So when it comes to the Bengals, obviously with Trey Hendrickson, they didn't franchise tag him. He's out on the market. I think Adam Schefter had a report that said he's seeking about $30 million. So obviously, the Bengals, without Trey Hendrickson, they weren't very good defensively. I did think, after the bye, they kind of started to figure things out a little bit. They started to get better. I think Miles Murphy, the former first-round pick out of Clemson, who just finished his 3rd season, I thought he really took a step forward. I like what they have at corner with DJ Turner II and Dax Hill. But there are a lot of pieces that really struggled, especially safety, which is why you saw them sign Brian Cook. The safeties had a real issue tackling last season with Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, and the play, and people will talk about, I think it's the Colston Loveland touchdown, in the final seconds when both Bengals safeties have a chance to tackle him in the final seconds. They don't, and he scores a touchdown to win the game, basically thwarting what would have been a really impressive Joe Flacco comeback drive. But when it comes to Hendrickson, 7 games played, 4 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, a forced fumble. I feel like if you're not going to have a Trey Hendrickson, the best thing you could do is try to emulate what the Seahawks had as far as having waves and waves of pass rush. So that's where I think a Boy Mafe comes into the mix there. There's still things they need to do. I think they need more defensive tackle help. I think they could use a veteran at linebacker. Obviously, though, we're only 1 day into free agency, and by getting more help in the pass rush and getting a safety, Brian Cook, who may not be a star, but he's very sound in coverage, and especially with his tackling, I think they've taken steps in the right direction to kind of to mitigate at least a little bit where they were with Trey Hendrickson available, and without him, improve the defense.
All right, so you look across the division now, and from the Bengals' perspective, Joe Burrow has to go against Myles Garrett twice, Max Crosby twice, T.J. Watt twice. I'm looking at that from the Browns and saying they got to get some offensive linemen. I would say the same thing. Job 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the Bengals is keep Joe Burrow healthy. Do they have enough? And what have you seen from that line?
Well, I think that line took steps forward last year. The former first-round pick from 2024, Marius Mims, their right tackle. I thought he really took a big step last year. As the season wore on, I think he got a lot better. And then their 3rd-round pick at left guard, Dylan Fairchild, I thought he had a pretty solid rookie season. He, too, progressed well. Them adding Dalton Risner just before the start of last season, it took him a little time to kind of firmly establish himself as a starter at right guard, but I thought he was very good, especially as a pass protector. They brought him back this season. I thought that was a big thing. But for me with the Bengals, as much as, we could talk about the defense being an issue and how it really has let them down the past 2 seasons. For me, I don't care how good the Bengals offensive line is. As long as you have Joe Burrow, that's always going to be a need. They need to keep stocking that up as much as possible, especially like you said, in an AFC North that now includes Max Crosby. So now you look at every division game, the Bengals have to go against a superstar edge rusher every single game. That's 6 out of 17. That's more than a third of the schedule. You're going up against either Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, or TJ Watt. So that tells me the Bengals cannot put enough emphasis on the offensive line, especially you do want to eventually find depth at tackle behind Orlando Brown Jr., behind Ted Karras. They're solid veterans, but you want to keep adding that depth. You don't want to have a situation where you don't have someone available off the bench who can provide steady protection for Joe Burrow, because as we've seen throughout, Joe Burrow's tenure, the Bengals without him are just struggle to win so much without him versus with him. I think last year they only won one game with Joe Burrow unavailable, and that was that Thursday night game against the Steelers when Joe Flacco, just in his second game, he'd only been with the team for about 9 days, came in and won a shootout against the Steelers.
So Bengals GM Duke Tobin, again at the NFL Scouting Combine, talked about building the roster in 2026.
Yeah, we're always trying to fit where we're picking to the talent level, and we don't want to just reach for a need, and so we're picking 10th this year. We're not going to rank 10 of the same position in order and take the 10th best guy at his position. So you always have to be flexible in terms of the positions, but yeah, there are definite areas of our football team that we're looking to enhance, and it can come from within, but some of it has to come from external sources, and the draft is a big chance for us to really hit on guys that can be long-term contributors for us, and then we'll look to free agency and maybe with some extensions, and we'll try to fill it in the best we can.
And they started to do the free agency part of it. What do you look for them to try to get first couple of rounds of the draft? What makes sense in your mind for them to do draft related?
I think defense obviously has to be a priority, particularly at pick number 10. My last mock on cleveland.com, you could see that I had the Bengals taking Caleb Downs, the safety from Ohio State. I would still take him even after signing Brian Cook, just because I feel like Caleb Downs has a strong case to be the best player in this entire draft. And when I look at, particularly the first round for the Bengals, I think the hope and, the best case, one of the as good as scenarios you could find is if either David Bielik from Texas Tech or Ruben Bain from Miami, those two elite edge rushers, if either one of them falls to number 10. It's going to be so hard to find a guy who can could replace the production left behind by Trey Hendrickson. But if you can at least find a defensive end who can mitigate some of that and at least show that he's got the potential to be a quality pass rusher, a guy who can really, inject some more energy off the edge, I think that's got to be important. And for the first round in particular, I think more important than anything is the Bengals need to find themselves a defensive pillar. They need to find themselves a guy who has that kind of gravity that's going to make offensive coordinators have to game plan around certain guys. For last season with Cincinnati, when Trey Hendrickson was out, you really didn't see that, because there were a lot of times it felt easy against the Bengals defense. Even though, like I said, they got better as the season went on, they certainly became a more stingy group under Al Golden, the defensive coordinator. I do. Him being there, this being his second season, I feel like they have a better idea. You would have to imagine they have a better idea of who fits, what they want to do. So I do think, at least in the first couple rounds, I would expect them to at least draft one edge rusher, maybe two, because Duke Tobin at the end of the season talked about how important it is to win with pass rush, and especially in the front. And when you look at the Bengals, they had the lowest blitz rate of every team in the NFL last season under Al Golden. Do they blitz more in 2026? I don't know, but that tells me that they're going to have to really get after that pass rush and really continue to add depth behind now Boy Mafe and Myles Murphy. They're going to need Shamar Stewart to take a step up in year number 2. But I do think adding another guy in the second round, say like a Zion Young from Missouri or Cassius Howell from Texas A&M, those are guys I think that if Bain or Bailey don't fall to them and say they take Caleb Downs or even Sonny Styles from Ohio State to boost a linebacking group that with two rookies last year and Demetrius Knight Jr. and Barrett Carter really had major growing pains. Between those four guys, I said Bain, Bailey, Downs, and Styles, as long as they get one of them, I think they're going to be fine. And then it comes down to adding depth in the depth on the pass rush, and maybe add more depth, at safety and linebacker, just to continue to, and defensive tackle. Really, there's not many areas outside of corner I think the Bengals should be looking at and feeling like that they can't improve there. This is a draft that it may not be the strongest, but it's pretty good on defense. So the Bengals should feel like they could add a couple contributors in some of those key concern areas in those first couple rounds.
All right, before I let you go, you always have Burrow, Chase Higgins, and even Chase Brown now has played well. How do you maximize the skill position guys?
I think it just comes out of protecting Joe Burrow. We saw that, when Joe Burrow went down, when Jake Browning took over, weeks 3, 4, and 5, those first couple games when he had to play, he just was not very good. And that's why they traded for Joe Flacco to at least provide some stability at quarterback. When Flacco came in before the bye, they looked like the Joe Burrow Bengals to an extent. But after the bye, he really struggled. Burrow came back at Thanksgiving, and you saw them really kind of hit their stride. And I think it comes down to just protecting Burrow, making sure that, this line is good to go from the start. Having all these guys back next season, I think is going to be a benefit to them. And again, as long as you can protect Burrow and you can still, and you have all these weapons around him, I think it's going to be beneficial to the Bengals, especially, like I said, they're the only team in the AFC North that has that full coaching continuity where everybody's back. So they kind of start at a better place than the other three teams. And not to mention last season, there was so much talk last year about starting slow. They were 2-0 out of the gate, even after losing Joe Burrow. They won a wild game against Jacksonville week 2. We didn't know how good Jacksonville was at the time, but for Cincinnati, I think it's going to always come down to protecting the quarterback. If you can protect the quarterback, he'll be able to find his guys and continue to have those guys make plays. That said, I do think if the Bengals can add a slot receiver, maybe something else at tight end, I do think that's something that I would look at.
Tim Bielik, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out, cleveland.com. Covers the Bengals as their beat reporter. We're going to step aside, take a quick timeout. We travel to Pittsburgh. Al Saunders, the Pittsburgh Steelers beat reporter on Steelers Now, straight ahead on our special edition of Sports4CLE, previewing the AFC North.
Get ready for action like never before. The 2026 Mid-American Conference Basketball Tournament presented by Credit Union One returns to Rocket Arena March 11th through the 14th. Every shot, every steal, every buzzer beater, it all comes down to this. The best of the MAC men's and women's teams battle for glory, pride, and a ticket to the big dance. Feel the intensity, hear the roar. MAC Tournament Basketball. Be there. Tickets on sale now at rocketarena.com.
Sports4CLE's special edition previewing the AFC North continues. Another team with a new head coach, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers GM Omar Khan at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, talking about working with the new head coach, Mike McCarthy.
Coach McCarthy's been on the job for about a month, and it's been a grind, but it's been tremendous. I personally have learned a lot through the process, and Steelers haven't done this in a long time, but it's been great, and a lot of work, a lot of conversations, good discussions, but that's where we're at, and I personally I'm really excited and have enjoyed the process. Coach McCarthy has been great.
Let's welcome in Steelers beat reporter Alan Saunders. He is the beat reporter for Steelers Now. Alan, it's the fourth head coach for the Steelers since 1969. What's been the reaction to Mike McCarthy?
I don't think people were very excited about the idea of Mike McCarthy when he was hired. I think most people expected the Steelers to go back to their previous mold, all of their last three head coaches, two of which are in the Hall of Fame, the third of which seems like he's got a good shot to get there, were young, first-time head coaches who had been defensive coordinators. And it seemed like, hey, why break, or why it's not broke, why fix it? And the Steelers went about as different from that mold as you can, a 62-year-old head coach with an offensive background. And so I think that sort of threw people for a loop a bit. But Mike McCarthy, I think, very quickly endeared himself to the people of Pittsburgh as a Pittsburgh native. Breaking up emotionally in his introductory press conference was how much this job means to him and how honored he was to have it. You're not going to get anyone that cares more about being the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers than Mike McCarthy. That doesn't mean it's guaranteed to work. It's certainly still a bit of a risk, but I think when you look at the Steelers roster, I think people have kind of talked themselves into, hey, they probably need more help on offense with a coach than they do on defense right now.
Yeah, that's kind of the first thing. And the other thing is, if you put a blind resume up of Mike McCarthy, John Harbaugh, and Mike Tomlin, they're virtually the same. The winning
Throw
percent.
Sean Payton in there too.
You're right. Yeah.
And the Broncos get all this credit for signing Sean Payton. And people are like, oh, Mike McCarthy. I don't know. I think Mike McCarthy has bad PR for some reason. I think he's a better coach than people realize.
Do you expect there to be some noticeable differences anytime you change coach? But a guy that has had success from a guy that's had success, do you expect there to be some noticeable differences with the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a completely different Pittsburgh Steelers offensive scheme. I think gone are the days of this being a, knock them down, drag them out, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of offense. I think they're going to play the West Coast scheme that Mike McCarthy has always played, or at least some version of it. I think you're going to see the Steelers offense look a lot more like the Bengals than the Browns and the Ravens, which have really been sort of three of the teams that have been on the forefront of this extra tight ends movement since the Browns. I think we're innovators of that a few years ago. And I think they're going to go the other way. I think you're going to see a team that's going to play mostly 3 wide receivers if they can do some work between now and the beginning of the season. Because right now, I think they only have 3 wide receivers on the roster.
Well, the Browns fans kind of feel your pain. They need some wide receivers. The other thing is the quarterback position. So, again, at the Combine, Omar Khan, about the Steelers' QB situation.
We're all searching for the next franchise, player. This guy's going to be our quarterback for 10 to 15 years, and, it might be Will. We don't know. We're excited to work with Will. Really liked him coming out last year. Unfortunately, he got hurt, and we didn't get a chance to see him in the preseason. But he, we've watched his progression in practice, and it's been exciting. And I know the new coaching staff, specifically Coach McCarthy, is excited to work with him. Really liked him coming out. The door's open to have Aaron back. I've had conversations with him. I spoke to him last week. Mike McCarthy spoke to him, and he knows how we feel about him. And it's right now we're proceeding. He's a free agent and he's not on the roster. So, but he knows how we feel about him.
So Will Howard, Ohio State quarterback that won a national championship. Rodgers has a history with McCarthy, going back to their time in Green Bay. Is the expectation that Aaron Rodgers is going to lace him up and play again?
I think so. I mean, obviously it's dependent on Aaron Rodgers deciding that he does want to play again. But the Steelers want him back, and if he is playing, I would assume it's going to be in Pittsburgh. And I assume we're going to know the answer to that here relatively shortly from what everyone was saying at the Combine. They don't expect this to drag out into the middle of the offseason like it did last year. There's a lot less mystery here, right? He was very comfortable in Pittsburgh, loved the city, loved the team that was around him. And while it is a new head coach and a new coaching staff, a lot of them are familiar to him. He has experience with Mike McCarthy. James Campen, the offensive line coach, also from the time in Green Bay. Tom Arst, the quarterback's coach, is one of the guys that's coming back from the last coaching staff. So not a lot of mystery for Aaron Rodgers to unravel, just about whether he wants to put his body through another NFL season at age 42, going into 43, and that's certainly a decision he has to make, but I don't think it's one that's going to take as long as last year did.
So when you look at this roster for the Steelers, what area do you think is most critical to improve?
I think it's absolutely wide receiver. I mean, they were deficient in that area for the last 2 seasons, and that was while they were running an Arthur Smith offense that really just wanted to run the football. Now you're talking about going to a West Coast offense where they're going to be throwing a lot more, and it's really just DK Metcalf. They have to invest in that position heavily this offseason. I would be surprised if they don't make 3 or 4 additions between free agency and the draft. It has to get a lot better for this offensive scheme to work. And It's going to be tough. It's not any. I do think it's a really deep draft class, but there aren't a ton of impact free agents at that position, or really any position in any given year. But when you go into free agency sort of needing something, it's always questionable as whether you're going to get it.
Bigger picture, you look at the AFC North. What do you see?
A mess. It's interesting. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen the AFC North like this, where really, I mean, who's confident? I mean, the Ravens are clearly feeling their own confidence. Like trading 2 first-round picks for Max Crosby. They feel like they're on the cusp of grabbing it. And I don't know, man. I saw that Baltimore team in Pittsburgh in Week 18, and they did not look that close. I don't know what's better, going all in with a bad hand or being where Pittsburgh and Cleveland are, which just seems to be shuffling the deck for another year. And can Cincinnati, I mean, on paper, they might have the most talented roster, and they've probably had the most disappointing results over the last few years. It doesn't seem like a division that has a clear favorite. It certainly doesn't seem like a division that has a Super Bowl contender that's obvious, but it will probably be very competitive just because that seems to be the way it always is.
So, again, let's look at the Steelers. What do you see as the strength of the roster as it's currently constructed now? And there's going to be changes without question. And then, is wide receiver the only area that you're really concerned about relative to the roster?
Yeah, I think their front seven on defense is still a strength. TJ Watt didn't necessarily have a TJ Watt season, but he was still pretty good. They've got Alex Highsmith and Nick Herbig behind him. Cam Hayward defying time and playing at an all-pro level at age 36. But they've got young guys coming behind him, and Keanu Benton and Derek Harmon had a very good rookie season. So I love their front seven. Their secondary probably still needs some work. They did re-sign Asante Samuel Jr. on Monday morning before free agency hit. They probably still have a little bit more work to do there. They've got Jalen Ramsey. Not sure where they're going to use him with a new defensive scheme with Patrick Graham. Is he a safety? Is he a slot corner? That's still a bit unsettled. And wherever he isn't, they probably still need some other help in that other area. They're getting Deshaun Elliott back from injury. Hope that he is the same player he was in 2024, but that's always questionable as well. Joey Porter Jr., the one guy I think they feel very good about in the secondary, but there's a lot of questions there as well. And then running back, Kenneth Gainwell was the team MVP, and he is a free agent as well. Will they be able to bring him back? And if not, what do they do at that position? I'd say those are left guard as well. Isaac Seumalo set to hit free agency. So they have some other holes. I think the secondary is another big picture concern. I think wide receiver and secondary will be the number 1 and number 2 sort of areas they address in the NFL draft this year.
So do you expect a quarterback to go maybe in the later rounds? And what is the read of Will Howard? You know, even if Rodgers comes back, you're basically year to year with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the idea would be for Will Howard and Mason Rudolph to compete for the backup quarterback job this preseason. I get the sense that Mike McCarthy is truly interested in seeing what Will Howard can do and thinks he can be more than just a backup. But we'll see. He didn't get to do anything in his rookie year. Had a finger injury in training camp, missed the whole preseason. Came back early in the season, but was just the number 3 guy. Ran some scout team. So they're really interested to see what he can do this preseason. I don't think they expect him to factor into the competing for a starting job this year, but that's something they're open to down the road. I think they would be open to taking another quarterback. They did some formal interviews at the Combine with some guys like Ty Simpson, Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier, and Carson Beck. But I wonder where they feel like that sweet spot is in the draft for taking one. They do have 4 picks in the top 100, 5 in the top 120. So they have a lot of draft capital. Will they want to use one of those picks on a quarterback, or will they prefer to wait until later? I'm not sure we have an answer to that yet.
Alan Saunders, as always, great stuff. Thanks so much for making the time to join us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll see you around.
Alan Saunders, he is the Steelers beat reporter for Steelers Now. We're going to take a quick time out. We will continue with our special edition of Sports4CLE AFC North preview. Sports4CLE. We'll be right back.
You got so much to do. It's got you feeling blue. Put a little flag in your day. 'Cause it's fun all over So come on, great games wait for you and me. Ohio, light a put a little play in your day. Put a little play in your day.
We continue our AFC North preview here on Sports4CLE. Another team with a new head coach, the Baltimore Ravens. They hired Jesse Minter. Minter at the NFL Combine talked about all the changes going on in the division, the AFC North.
The AFC North's always been an unbelievable division. I think it's a little bit in transition this year, you know, for the first time in a while when you've had John and Mike for so many years. Zach's obviously now like the guy that's been there the longest. Elite quarterback, elite skill players, I think an improving defense. So, you know you're going to have your hands full every time you play them. Pittsburgh, same thing. Now bringing in Mike McCarthy, tons of respect for him. You know, so going from a kind of a defensive background with Mike to now more of an offensive coach. And then same thing with Monk in Cleveland, guy that obviously everybody in our building is familiar with. Know he'll do a great job, and really just look forward to competing with all those guys.
Let's welcome in Brian Wacker. He is a Ravens beat reporter for the Baltimore Sun. Brian, appreciate you joining us. What was it about Minter that made him the guy? You heard early and you kind of drew Minter to the Ravens. What was it about him that the Ravens wanted so badly?
Well, I think, first of all, this is an organization, that believes very deeply in what it does. Even with the firing of John Harbaugh, they weren't going to completely change direction here. Minter is a guy who's been here before, understands the culture, knows people in the building. And I think they view him kind of as the 2.0 version of what they have been, along with really looking to restore a defense that had been a hallmark for so long, but had clearly fallen back over the past 2 years.
So we'll get to the defense in a minute. Offensively, you bring in Declan Doyle, a guy that was under Ben Johnson for a couple of years. What's the expectation for what the Ravens will be offensively?
Maybe more trick plays, perhaps. But you're right. Look, you worked under Ben Johnson, worked under Sean Payton, so you really don't have to look too hard to see a guy who's going to be creative. He's going to look for efficiency, but he's also given a guy like Derrick Henry in the backfield. I think he's going to look for this offense to be physical. He's also 2 months younger than quarterback Lamar Jackson. So perhaps there'll be a connection there that will kind of energize somebody who's already been a two-time MVP and really been, one of the best or maybe the best player in all of football. So I look for kind of a little more juice out of this offense, certainly than we saw last year, and a little more creativity probably than we've seen.
I think anybody that saw Lamar Jackson consistently knew last year he was not the guy that he normally is. How healthy is he? How do you think he evolves with the new offensive coordinator?
Well, I think certainly health will be a big part of that. I think him being healthy would a huge difference, obviously. I think first you have to look at Lamar's track record. You can go back under previous offensive coordinator Greg Roman, and then, of course, Todd Monkin. And in the first couple of years of each of those guys, Lamar was incredibly dynamic and explosive, but in different ways, really, each time. And so I think we'll sort of see that happen here as well. There's really no reason to think that, within a year or two under Declan Doyle, that he shouldn't be able to kind of recapture some of that magic. I also think he's come a long way as a passer, and I think the way he sees the game has come a long way. So I think you'll see a bit more under center. You'll see Lamar a bit more under center maybe than we have in the past, and certainly play action I think will be a big part of the picture, which I think, of course, makes him that much more dangerous.
So everybody knows Ravens have Zay Flowers, real dynamic type wide receiver. Head coach Jesse Minter asked, what type of receivers would complement Zay Flowers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, receivers similar, like they're weapons on offense, and so they come in all different shapes and sizes, I would say. So guys that can be impactful with the ball in their hands, that can make, I think as I've started watching them, it's like, can they get open? Can they separate at the top of routes? Can they make contested catches, which just about every catch in the NFL is probably going to be contested in some way. And then when they, like, how do they play without the ball as well? Like, what type of teammate are they? How do they play without the ball? You're only going to get the ball in a great game, 8 or 9 times, in a normal game 4 or 5 times. So can they impact the game in other ways? And so that's a great group of wideouts this year, and certainly look forward to continuing the evaluation process with all those guys.
So, Brian, he said he wants a wide receiver to block without coming out and saying he wants a wide receiver to be willing and able to block. What about the wide receiving core? Flowers has kind of popped. I know you've got Andrews and you had Likely, so the tight ends were a big part of it. Are the Ravens looking for more from their wide receivers?
Well, absolutely. It's a position that's thin, as you mentioned. You've got Zay Flowers, you've got Rashad Bateman, who had a down year last year, but really flashed 2 seasons ago, and the guy with a lot of talent, but sort of felt like he was underutilized last year and is a bit mercurial within that offense. But really beyond that, it's a very thin group. I mean, it drops off quickly after there. So that's a need for sure. I think you'll see them add in the draft, perhaps in free agency. I know there's certainly been a lot of buzz around A.J. Brown and the Eagles and whether, he'd talk about guys who would fit and kind of complement Zay Flowers. He's that prototypical X receiver, so he'd obviously fit well and blend well within the scheme, one would think. A guy who can block, certainly. But Rashad Bateman also has the ability, as that X receiver. And so maybe, with a new offensive coordinator and a new focus and some rejuvenation, maybe that energizes him as well. But certainly I could see them drafting a wide receiver as well. Wouldn't shock me, depending on obviously some other moves. But, if one of those top 2 or 3 receivers falls to them in the first round, maybe a Carnell Tate, maybe they kind of surprise people and go that route. Again, sort of depending on what other moves they make here via free agency or in the trade market. So, but either way, I expect them to certainly add to that position. It's one of the bigger needs on the team.
So Minter is a defensive-minded head coach, and he's been viewed as a bright up-and-comer, was the DC for the Chargers. What do you think about the defense? How does the Ravens' defense evolve and look maybe a little different with Jesse Minter as the head coach?
Well, first, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, I don't think it'll be entirely different. I think it'll have certainly some twists and some changes to it. First off, I think he will also raise the floor. I think we saw that, the secondary in particular, that's been an area of his expertise, and that was an area where the team really struggled last season. Ditto with creating pressure on the quarterback. That's been a big emphasis here in the offseason. And, of course, we saw what Odafe Owe did once he got to L.A. after being traded from the Ravens to the Chargers last season. So, I would expect, again, some of this is personnel dependent. Look, maybe they make a big push for, say, a Max Crosby or somebody like that. That would certainly boost the defense in a big way in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. But I think certainly overall, I think you'll see him raise the floor, come up with some creative ways to maybe get to the quarterback and certainly tighten up things in the secondary. And I think also Anthony Weaver being back in the building, even though Jesse Minter will call the plays, Anthony Weaver as the defensive coordinator, he's a guy who commands a room, brings some gravitas to those defensive meetings. So I think that'll also help improve things for this Ravens defense.
So you heard Jesse Minter kind of allude to it when we started this segment. A lot of changes in the AFC North. Have the changes changed at all with the Ravens?
No, of course not. I mean, this is an organization that in the building, whether it's realistic or not, they expect to be contenders year in and year out. And look, most of the time they are. They're always in the mix. Very rarely are they not. Last year was the first year they missed the playoffs since 2021. And so, the expectation is they made these changes to get back to that standard, to get back to being a contender. And look, you look around this division, it certainly feels like, given all that change, that it's very much up for grabs heading into this season, and really feels as wide open as it's probably been in a number of years.
Yeah, the thing is, 3 new head coaches, and quite frankly, one of them's probably going to take off, one of them's going to struggle, and one of them's kind of do about what they normally do. That's usually the way those things work out. And you could throw it up in the air as to which one is going to be which.
Yeah, and again, look, you've got first-time head coach in Jesse Minter, a lot of first-time guys on that staff. I think he brought something like 5 college coaches with him to help fill out that staff. Brought in some experienced guys too, but it really is a blend. Of course, you guys have Todd Monkin, his first time being a coach in the NFL, head coach in the NFL, and then of course the change in Pittsburgh with Mike McCarthy and questions there in terms of Aaron Rodgers and the quarterback. Questions obviously a quarterback in Cleveland, Cincinnati, defensive questions there. That's been a big problem obviously for years. So sort of wonder how that's going to shake out for them as well. But just feels like a lot of uncertainty with this group and with this division this year.
Brian Wacker, thanks so much for the time and insight. Appreciate it very much. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
That Max Crosby trade that Brian referred to was made official earlier this week, and it marks the first time in the Ravens' 31-year existence that they've traded a first-round pick for a veteran player. Baltimore had the 14th pick in this year's draft, so they trade this year's first, next year's first, and they get Max Crosby, one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. So you've got Watt, Crosby, and Myles Garrett all in the same division. Good luck, Joe Burrow. Hopefully you can make it through a season healthy. That's going to do it for this special edition of Sports4CLE. I want to thank all of the beat reporters from across the AFC North and Emory Hunt for joining us. Have a great weekend, everybody. We will see you Monday at 4 on Sports4CLE.